we're going to be talking about the application deployment process. Now, it used to be that when we do this, we'd always do it based upon collections. And so I'd have a collection of this, and a collection of that, and a collection of this, and a collection of that. And I can reuse these collections, which is pretty handy. Unfortunately, we end up with so many collections that after a while I'm like, I don't know which collection does which, so I'll just make a new one every time, and it makes the problem even worse and even worse and even worse and even worse. And now we have a bunch of collection sprawl. So what Microsoft has done is they've said, look, we can still do collections if you like. So all of those efforts and all that time to create this giant sprawl of collections is not for naught. You can still use it. But what we'd like you to do is sort of transition over into requirements. With requirements, I can do this based upon the deployment. I can do it based upon the application. But what it does is it will go through and define the rules of deployment within the deployment itself, as opposed to having to build a particular collection. Once I create this requirement, I can use it all over the place. But again, requirements are completely optional if you like. So if I like the old style collection, I can use the old style collection. If I want to just use requirements, I can just use requirements. If I want to do a combination of the two, well, I can do a combination of the two. So it makes it pretty easy for us to use. When we decide to create these applications, we do have an application wizard. Most of the time, these older applications are going to be considered packages, and their legacy applications, all the new stuff that we create, are going to be called application deployment. So let's go ahead and wander in here and see what we have inside of here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our software library, then we're going to get into application management, and then we're going to get into applications. Then what we're going to do is we are going to go through and we are going to create an application. So we want to go through and we want to create a brand new application. So I'm going to right click on it and I can say create an application. And then we're going to be off to see the wizard. So it's going to say, well, what type of file is this? We're going to use a Microsoft installer file, but it could also be an app package file. There's just tons and tons and tons of different options. But we're going to go ahead and stay with an MSI. Then we need to give it a location. This location has to be off of a universal naming convention. In other words, // server name / share name, because we want everybody to be able to access it. If I say C:/, then everybody would have to have it on their C drive. So we're going to use the universal naming convention. So I'm going to do a // on it. Let me get my head out of the way. // BOSTON SRV01. And then I have a share. So I can go out to browsing. Let's see what we have. // BOSTON SRV01. Go into there, and I have it set up under apps to share, I believe. Apps to deploy, that's what we have. So I have Google here, the 32-bit. I have 64-bit. We've already deployed the 32-bit. So let's go ahead and push out the 64-bit. So that's what we have. I can also manually specify the information, but since it's an MSI, it is going to try to import it. And so it goes in and pulls it in and pulls it in and pulls it in, trying to figure out what's in here. Now, this is where I can either automatically detect it or I can manually detect it. Usually I like to go ahead and have it automatically detected. If I want to, I can put in manual entry stuff if I need, and then maybe I have some additional information I have to put in, but for the most part, pretty straightforward. So here we have the name. I could put in administrative concepts, REMEMBER, Bob's team wants Firefox, something like that. Put in the publisher, software version, optional reference if you like. You can also go in and create some administrative categories. So for example, I can say that this is BROWSERS. So that's one category. I can have another one that is OFFICE. We have that category. I can make another one called APPLICAT. That's kind of generic. We'll call it ENGINERING. engineering tools, and I can belong to multiple categories, but what we're going to do is we're just going to have it under browsers. And then I'll make another one called BASELI, Baseline Apps, and I'm going to put it in both browsers and baseline apps. So now we have it in both of the administrative categories. And administrative categories is nice because if I have a bunch of software, I may have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of apps, and I don't want to just go, here's a giant laundry list of all the apps, pick the ones you want. I want to give it a little bit easier. So, oh, you're administrative assistant, or oh, you're a software developer, or oh, you're one of the creatives, or whatever. They would be able to go into their particular category and find apps that are there. And like I said, if I have an application that matches multiple categories, I just put them in multiple categories. So it's pretty simple to do. So we have the name, we have the administrator comments, we have all of this. We have the installation program. If the installation program is a 32-bit app, I can say whether or not I want it to run on 64-bit. So I can say run a 32-bit process on a 64-bit process. And then I can say, well, what is this? We can say install for system, which means it's going to be hidden from the user account. When this installs for system, it's going to be pushed out to the system, and it's not going to be advertised for the user. It's just going to show up and be there. Now, this can be a problem if the installation routine asks questions, because the system isn't going to show those dialog boxes, and so the user isn't going to know that those dialog boxes actually exist, and so they will never be able to click on them, and then after a while the installation will time out, and then it'll be a failed installation. So if I do it by system, I don't see the dialog boxes. I can also install it by user, and by installing it by user, the user will be able to see it, and they will be able to interact with it depending upon the installer as to whether or not it'll be something that you can react to. The last one we have is install for system if resource is a device, otherwise install it for a user. And what that means is that if I push it out for a user, if it's one of their primary devices that they have associated with them, it'll install it. Otherwise, it'll install it just based on the user. So that's what we have. So then we'll go ahead and say next. And here's our little summary. We say next. And then it goes through and it creates all of the little components that we have right there. There we go.